Steve Harvey has seen it all in over a decade of hosting Family Feud. Nervous contestants, hilarious wrong answers, families crying from joy after winning. He thought he was ready for anything. But on one ordinary afternoon in the Family Feud studio, something happened that made him stop the game completely, and what he did next left 200 people in that audience completely silent. There are moments in life when someone crosses a line so clearly, so publicly, that staying quiet becomes its own kind of wrong. Steve Harvey has always been the kind of man who speaks up, but even his closest producers would later say they had never seen him move that fast or speak with that much controlled fury before or since. This is the story of Marcus Webb, a 67-year-old Army veteran from Columbus, Ohio, and the moment that one careless comment from a stranger tried to strip him of his dignity on national television. It didn't work, because Steve Harvey was watching. Marcus Webb was born in 1957 in a small house on the east side of Columbus, the third of 5 children raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a laundry so her kids could eat. From the time he was old enough to fold his own clothes, Marcus was taught one thing above everything else: you show up. You show up for your family, for your community, and when your country calls, you show up for that too. At 19, Marcus enlisted in the United States Army. He served 2 tours, first in Germany and then in the Gulf, where in 1991 his convoy hit an IED during a logistics run outside Basra. He survived. 3 of the 4 men in the vehicle with him did not. Marcus came home with shrapnel wounds along his left side, a Purple Heart he kept in a shoebox under his bed, and a right leg that would never fully cooperate again. For 30 years after coming home, Marcus rebuilt his life the only way he knew how, quietly, steadily, without complaint. He retrained as an electrician, worked his way into a foreman role, and raised 2 daughters alongside his wife Dorothy, who still called him her hero, even when he rolled his eyes and told her to stop embarrassing him. By the time Marcus turned 60, he was using a wheelchair full-time. The old shrapnel wounds had never fully healed, and a second injury during a job site accident in 2009 had made walking increasingly painful. He adapted. That was what Marcus Webb did. He adapted, he showed up, and he never once asked for sympathy. His youngest daughter, Keisha, had applied to Family Feud on a whim. She knew her father loved the show. Every Sunday evening for as long as she could remember, Marcus would position his wheelchair in front of the television, mute the commercials, and shout answers at the screen before the contestants could get them out. He was almost always right. Keisha had filled out the application in secret, and when the call came that the Webb family had been selected, she sat her father down at the kitchen table and told him. Marcus Webb, the man who had survived a war, rebuilt a life, and never shed a public tear, cried for 10 minutes straight. The Webb family arrived at the studio on a bright Tuesday morning. Marcus wore his best collared shirt, the dark navy one Dorothy had ironed 3 times the night before. Keisha stood to his right. His older daughter Renee and her husband David flanked the other side. They were not there for the money, though they certainly wouldn't turn it down. They were there because a daughter had wanted to give her father one afternoon where he got to be the hero in a room full of strangers, the same way he had always been the hero at home. The opposing family was the Caldwell family from Atlanta, loud, competitive, and clearly enjoying every second of the studio energy. Among them was a man named Troy Caldwell, mid-30s, with the easy confidence of someone who had never had much reason to doubt himself. Troy was funny. He played to the cameras. The audience liked him immediately. Nobody could have predicted what he was about to do. The game started well. Both families were energetic, the answers were flowing, and Steve Harvey was in full form, cracking jokes, drawing out the nervous laughter, doing exactly what he does better than anyone on television. The Webb family was holding their own. Marcus answered 2 questions from his wheelchair position at the podium, both times delivering the correct response before Steve had even finished asking. The audience cheered. Marcus grinned the way men of his generation grin, not showing teeth, just a slow, satisfied nod. It was during the 3rd round that things shifted. Marcus had buzzed in on a question about physical activities. He gave his answer, swimming, and it landed on the board for 8 points. A modest score, but solid. He turned his wheelchair slightly to make room for Keisha to step in for the next question, and as he did, the wheels caught briefly on the edge of the podium mat. It was a split-second thing, a small, mechanical moment with no meaning attached to it, but Troy Caldwell saw it, and he laughed. It wasn't just a laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes with a lean toward your family members, a lowered voice that isn't quite low enough, and a comment clearly meant to be heard only by the people standing next to you, except the studio microphones were closer than Troy realized. And Steve Harvey, standing 6 feet away, heard every word. "Guess the wheels are as slow as the answers," Troy said, nodding toward Marcus's wheelchair. The words landed in the studio like something dropped from a great height. A few people in the audience pulled in breath. Keisha's head turned slowly. Dorothy, seated in the front row of the audience section, went completely still. Marcus Webb stared straight ahead, jaw tight, saying nothing because that was what Marcus Webb did. He had learned a long time ago that some insults didn't deserve the dignity of a response. But the silence lasted only 4 seconds, because Steve Harvey had already stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing people would talk about afterward that he didn't need to. He simply stopped moving, turned fully toward Troy Caldwell, and looked at him in a way that made the entire studio understand that the game had paused. "Hold on," Steve said, 2 words spoken quietly. "We're going to stop right here." The producers in the booth exchanged looks. The floor director took a half step forward, then stopped. Nobody interrupted Steve Harvey when he used that tone. Steve turned to the audience and then back to Troy. His voice was level, measured, and absolutely clear. "I need you to understand something. This man," he gestured toward Marcus with a deliberate, respectful, open hand, "wore the uniform of this country. He went places most people can't imagine, and he came back carrying things most people couldn't survive carrying. That wheelchair is not a punchline. It is a consequence of his service to you, to me, and to every single person in this building." The studio was silent in a way that television studios almost never are. Troy Caldwell had gone pale. Whatever he had expected, a light reprimand, a joke to smooth it over, the usual machinery of game show diplomacy, this was not it. Steve Harvey was not smoothing anything over. "I don't care what the score is. I don't care what round we're in. There are certain things that do not happen on this stage. Mocking a disabled veteran is one of them. And I need you to look at this man and understand what you just said." Troy opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Marcus. Marcus Webb was looking back at him, not with anger, something harder than anger, actually. The steady, patient look of a man who had faced worse things than this and was simply waiting to see what would happen next. The tension in the room was a physical thing. People in the audience had stopped filming on their phones. Nobody wanted to miss what came next by looking at a screen. What happened next surprised everyone, including, it seemed, Troy Caldwell himself. He apologized, not the polished, camera-aware apology of someone reading from a script, not the half apology of someone who is mostly sorry they got caught. Troy turned to Marcus and his voice broke slightly on the first word. "Sir, that was wrong. That was completely wrong of me, and I'm sorry. I don't have an excuse for it." The audience breathed again. Steve Harvey watched Troy for a long moment. Then he nodded once. He turned back to Marcus and said quietly, "How do you want to handle this?" Marcus Webb looked at Troy Caldwell for what felt like a long time. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Let's finish the game," Marcus said. "I didn't come all this way to go home early." The audience erupted. Not polite applause, the full, standing up, genuinely moved kind that comes when a room full of strangers watches someone choose grace over bitterness in real time. Dorothy pressed both hands to her mouth in the front row. Keisha reached down and squeezed her father's shoulder. Steve Harvey looked at Marcus for a moment with an expression that had nothing performative in it, just one man recognizing another. "Man," Steve said and shook his head slowly. "Man," he turned back to the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Webb, veteran, father, and apparently the most composed human being on this planet." The game resumed, and something had shifted in the studio. The Caldwell family competed with visible humility for the rest of the match. The jokes stopped. The posturing stopped. Troy Caldwell answered his questions quietly and moved out of the way when it wasn't his turn, as if trying to take up less space than he had before. The Webb family won the main game. It wasn't a blowout, but it was decisive. When the buzzer sounded, Marcus raised one fist from the arm of his wheelchair, not a wild celebration, just a single, contained gesture, and Keisha grabbed him from the side in a hug that nearly knocked the chair sideways. Then came fast money. Keisha went first and scored 142 points. When Marcus rolled to the podium for his turn, the studio was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet this time. Not tension, anticipation. Steve leaned down slightly as he handed Marcus the podium controls. "You ready?" "Been ready since 1991, Marcus said. The audience laughed. Steve laughed. Even the floor crew laughed. Marcus Webb proceeded to answer 4 of his 5 fast money questions with the top survey response. The final question, "Name something a soldier never forgets," he answered without hesitation. "Coming home." The board lit up. Number 1 answer, 41 points. The Webb family had won $20,000. The studio went sideways with noise. Steve Harvey, for perhaps the first time in his hosting career, just stood back and watched the celebration without trying to narrate it. Some moments don't need commentary. This was one of them. When the noise finally settled and the Webb family gathered at center stage for the post-win segment, Steve Harvey did something he rarely does on game show television. He sat down on the edge of the stage at eye level with Marcus's wheelchair, and he just talked to him. "Tell me something," Steve said. "How did you learn to do that? To not react the way most people would have reacted?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the deliberate weight of someone who has thought about something for a very long time. "In the army, they teach you early your reaction is the only thing you control, not what happens to you, not what someone else does. Just how you respond. I've had 30 years of practice deciding how to respond." Steve nodded. "And what do you want people to take from today, people watching at home?" Marcus looked directly at the camera. "I want them to know that every wheelchair has a story," he said. "Every cane, every prosthetic, every person who moves a little slower than they used to, there is a story behind that. Before you make a comment, ask yourself if you know that story. Chances are you don't. And chances are if you did know it, you wouldn't be laughing." The studio was completely still. Steve looked at the camera for a long moment before speaking. "I've been doing this show for a lot of years. I've had families come through here who made me laugh until I couldn't breathe. I've had moments that made me cry. But I can count on one hand the times someone stood in this studio and reminded me what character actually looks like. Today is one of those times." He turned back to Marcus. "The $20,000 is yours, sir. You earned it 10 times over. But can I ask you one more thing? What are you going to do with it?" Marcus glanced at Dorothy in the front row. She shook her head slowly, as if she already knew what he was going to say and wasn't surprised. "There's a Veterans Resource Center back home in Columbus," Marcus said. "They help guys coming back from deployment find housing, get job training, work through everything they're carrying. They've been operating out of a space that's too small for 10 years. We're going to make a contribution." Steve Harvey didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked at the audience. "You hear that?" he said. "This man just won $20,000 on a game show, and his first instinct is to give it to the people he served with. I want everyone watching at home to remember this the next time you think you're having a hard day." When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the clip of Steve stopping the game went viral within hours. But it wasn't the confrontation that kept people watching. It was Marcus, his stillness, his composed answer when Steve asked how he wanted to handle it, his 5 fast money answers, and that final exchange about the Veterans Center. The comment section on every platform that carried the clip said the same things in different words. "We needed this. We needed to see this." The Columbus Veterans Resource Center received over $180,000 in donations in the 2 weeks after the episode aired. The center's director posted a statement saying they had enough to expand into a new facility and hire 2 full-time case managers. She credited the Webb family by name. Marcus Webb gave exactly 1 interview after the episode aired to a local Columbus news station. He sat in his kitchen in the navy collared shirt, Dorothy at the table behind him, and said what he had to say in 4 minutes flat. He wasn't interested in being famous. He wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol. He was a man who had lived his life the best way he knew how, and one afternoon on a game show that turned out to be enough. "I'm not a hero," he told the reporter. "Heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I'm just a guy who showed up." Keisha Webb later posted a short message on social media that was shared over 300,000 times. It said, "My dad has been showing up his whole life, for his country, for our family, for himself. He wasn't surprised by what happened in that studio. He's had that kind of patience since before I was born. I'm just glad the world got to see it." Troy Caldwell, to his credit, gave his own statement. He said that the day in that studio had genuinely changed something in him, that he had grown up in a world where that kind of joke was considered harmless, and that Marcus Webb had shown him, without a single angry word, exactly how much damage so-called harmless words could carry. He reached out privately to the Webb family afterward. What was said in that exchange remained between them. Steve Harvey spoke about the episode several times in the months that followed. In one interview, he put it simply, "There are moments in this job where you stop being a host and you become a human being. That day, I didn't have a choice. I saw something wrong and I said something. That's not courage, that's just basic decency. The real courage was sitting in that wheelchair." Marcus Webb returned to Columbus, to Dorothy, to the East Side neighborhood where he had grown up. He still watched Family Feud on Sunday evenings. He still muted the commercials. He still shouted answers before the contestants could get them out. He was still almost always right. The Purple Heart stayed in its shoebox under the bed, the way it always had. Marcus Webb didn't need it on display. He already knew what it meant. And after that Tuesday afternoon in the Family Feud studio, so did everyone else. Some people carry their dignity quietly without ceremony for decades. And every once in a while, the world gets to see exactly how heavy that weight is and how gracefully it can be carried. Marcus Webb was not a man who had asked for an audience. But on the day he got one, He gave every single person watching a lesson they would carry with them long after the credits rolled. That is what honor looks like when it has nowhere left to hide.